Okay, let's get going. We're on the homeward stretch. Okay, you've had lunch. Only a few more presentations to go before you can head off home. Anyway, my name's Wayne Newington. I'm a principal consultant for Microsoft New Zealand, based here in Auckland. What I'm going to go through today is take you through InfoPath 210 tips and tricks. Now, I just want to point out that this is actually a 200 level talk. Okay, so 200 means no code. Okay, I'm going to give you a complete overview, and it's going to be a bit of a tips and tricks type, showing you what you can actually do in InfoPath. So just a bit of a setting expectations around this. How many people here have used InfoPath 210 already? Okay, quite a few. Okay, how many people have never touched InfoPath 210? Okay, quite a few. Okay, good, because this talk is actually geared at you guys, showing you what you can actually do within InfoPath 210. I'm kind of assuming that you actually haven't gone in there and played with it too much, or haven't looked at it. And we're just going to have a little bit of fun. Now, the format of this particular talk is very, very different. Basically, I've only got a few slides in here. This is the second to last slide. Yay! I bet you after 2.5 days, you're sick and tired of seeing PowerPoint. Okay? So what we're going to do, we're going to spend the rest of the time just diving in there, looking at demos. But don't forget, this is a 200 level talk, so there's actually no code. So what I'm going to do is actually go in there and actually show you how you can use InfoPath out-of-the-box type functionality with no code, okay, and go through a whole lot of different forms that you can actually build up and use, and how they can actually interrelate and actually connect through to SharePoint 210. Okay, so you're ready. Okay, cool. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to sit down a little bit, so I'm going to pop up and down a bit. So if I go up and down like a yo-yo, just please excuse me from that. So I'll get rid of that, just to prove it. Okay, note the number of slides. We're on the second to last one already. So what we're going to do is we're just going to jump in and actually have a look at InfoPath 210 for the first time. So when you go into this, make sure that this works. The first thing you actually notice is you've got these two different templates that are actually kind of jumping up there from a SharePoint perspective. Okay, so once again, this is from a SharePoint perspective. We've got two different types of forms that we can actually worry about up here. We've got the SharePoint list, and we've got the SharePoint form library. The SharePoint list is actually new to SharePoint 210. Now, the whole idea behind this is this actually integrates directly into SharePoint lists, and it's a lot more richer. It actually does a lot more integration into SharePoint lists. The form library is what you're probably used to from a 2003 perspective. Okay, so the decision then becomes, which way do you actually go? Do you go a SharePoint list, or do you go for a form library? And unfortunately, this is one of these it depends type answer, you know, the bane of doing consulting. It depends on what you want to do. So if you want to go to that session, that's fine. Completely understand. Okay, so if you look at the SharePoint list, okay, what you typically use, or what the whole guide is behind this is that you'll probably 9 times out of 10 actually go for the SharePoint list. This integrates directly in, and there's been a lot of work actually going into this to actually make it a lot more usable. So this is going in, you can manipulate, you can control your SharePoint list directly. On the other hand, if you've got a form library, this is where if you've got a more complex schema that you need to drive that doesn't support the type of data types that you've got in SharePoint, that's when you need to go for the forms library. The other time you may want to use a forms library is that if you want to put any code in there as well. Okay, so if you want to embed any code, you need to go for the forms library approach. And then if you do the forms approach, you can then turn it into a sandbox solution and then implement it that way. But because this is a 200 level talk, no code, okay? So we're not going to go down that route. The other thing that you may want to use a form library for is that if you need to digitally sign this particular document. So this is something that you could do in SharePoint and using some of the Office products as well, is that you can actually digitally sign documents. So you can say, right, I want Joe Bloggs over here to digitally sign this document to say that yes, they've actually approved it. Now, if you need to do that, then you do need to use the InfoPath form library. Another consideration that you may want to use for the form library is that if you want to use one of the SharePoint 210 features, which is the document sets. Okay, so if you want to save everything that you've actually collected in this, you can actually save all that information, use the forms library approach on this, and then save that XML document that goes into there. So it's a bit of the trade-off between those. So we're just going to go in and go for a SharePoint list. Go in and do the design of the form. So the first thing it actually does is it asks you, where do you want to actually, or what SharePoint list do you want to connect to. Now what I'm actually doing in this particular machine here, this is my Windows 7 machine. Okay, so I am running I'm running SharePoint on this locally, okay, which proves that you can actually do it. And I'm just going to connect through to my local machine, which I've got running SharePoint on it. Then it gives me the opportunity here to go in and say, do I want to create a new list, or do I just want to grab an existing one? And I'm just going to grab my TechEd Hello World, because you do need your mandatory Hello World demo. Go finish. Okay, and there I've got my layout, which is actually sitting in there. Okay, so it's a pretty vanilla thing. So what it's basically done is that it's reached into SharePoint, pulled out the list information, looked at the type of items that are actually in there, and it's actually pulled in the most appropriate data types that we've actually got in there. Now there's a couple of interesting things in here. If we start looking at the page design, we've got these funky new layouts and templates that we've actually got sitting in there. Okay, so we've basically got these 4 that are provided out of the box for us. We've got the SharePoint ones. Now these SharePoint ones actually match to the themes that you get within SharePoint 2.10. Okay, so if you're going to do it and use your form directly for SharePoint, then these are the types of themes that you should actually go for, and they do match reasonably well against what's actually in SharePoint. The other type of themes that we've got in here, you've got the professional and you've got the industrial. So this is more for your professional, your more formal type forms that you may want to create. Then you can get into the playground or into the modern ones, which is trying to be a little bit more funky. Okay, so the colours are a little bit more brighter, a little bit more bold, trying to be out there so you may possibly use these in something like an internet-facing site or something like that. Now, the question that usually comes up, and I'm going to beat you to it, is can you customise these themes? Unfortunately, no. Okay, which is a bit of a stink, and hopefully that's going to be an improvement on the next version. The other thing too, just to be wary about too, is that in SharePoint 2.10, although you can still use themes, you can actually go through and dynamically change the themes on the sites now. Now, they don't actually relate, okay? These are the out-of-the-box themes that you get. It's already got the style sheets already applied into it, so you're a little bit constrained as to what you can actually do in here. Okay, so just be a little bit wary about that when you go to play with it. The other thing that we can do in here, which is also quite good, is that we can actually look at our page layouts and our page designs that are actually in here. So we've got our different layouts that we can put in here, and we can apply those through. So there is different styles that we can put in here. All I can see at the moment are those ones. Okay, if I go into other forms, I can actually see different table layouts, etc. on there. So what this basically means is that when I go to design my form, what I should try and do is actually choose the most appropriate theme to get the colours and all that sorted out, and then look at the layout that I've actually got there. The idea being here is that you want to try to compress and show as much information as you can on the form without actually trying to make it a bit too, clunky. Because what basically happens when people go to forms, they only look at a little or subset of the information on there. So you want to compact it down and use the most appropriate layout. The other thing that we've got in here is that we have got these, basically the style types that are associated in here. Now once again, this is the same concept and idea behind the themes. Okay, we've got these out-of-the-box ones. If we go through and actually start using these out-of-the-box styles, okay, that's actually going to flow through really nicely into what actually the theme's going to be using and to modify the styles, etc. that go with it. So what this basically means is that you shouldn't really be going through and hard coding your fonts, colours, or your font sizes, etc. if you can avoid it. What you should really be doing is trying to use the out-of-the-box ones, and that way it makes it a little bit more flexible and makes it a little bit better to render as we go through. Okay. So that's just the quick hello world, okay? Not a big deal, pretty boring. So let's go have a look into our SharePoint site. And we've got the traditional, our standard and enterprise wiki site that we've got in here. And if we look at a standard type list that we've got in here, like the contacts, if we go in there and look at the add new item, this is actually an InfoPath form, okay? So SharePoint 2.10 is now natively using InfoPath behind the scenes. Okay, so all the forms that are actually in there are InfoPath forms. So we've got this real standard, boring contacts form. Doesn't look too interesting. It's a bit dull, boring. Okay, so what we can do is pizzazz this up a little bit. So what I've done is that I've created a new list based off contacts and called it TechEd Speakers. And if I go to add a new item in here, And this is a form that I've built up. So what we've got under here is just a couple of design techniques around how do you actually build out your forms. Basically what I've done under here is grouped like information together. So that's another one of those tips and things that you should be doing. If information makes sense to be together, like address, group it together. The idea being here is that it will actually draw the people's attention to that particular area that you need them to focus on. The other thing that we can do under here too is that I've got this active button. So I want to capture, the people that are going to be speaking at TechEd, but sometimes the speakers decide to go AWOL on us. But I still want to capture that information when they go AWOL, but I don't want to always see it. So I can simply click on the active, okay, and that's going to show this other area down on the form. Okay, so we can actually go through there, see what's actually in there. The other thing I can do, just to prove, it's just a quick display, hide in there. The other thing I can do under here is if I type in my email address, I can go Fred, okay, tab off that, I get the traditional red little thing that's actually building up in there. Can you see that okay at the back? Okay. And what I can then do is put in a valid email address, still not valid, .com, tab off, okay, and now that's become a valid email address. So I'm doing some very simple validation on the actual form. I can also do other things too on the dates. So if I put back a previous date, that's all good. If I put something out in the future, it's going to go red for me. Now I'm doing this without having to do any code, okay? I'm just going to re-stress that. No code is associated with this. I've also got this funky little thing here too where I want to basically understand if the speaker's a good speaker or they're going to be an evil speaker. Okay, so I can simply click on those and change what the actual state of that particular thing is actually in there. So a simple yes, no, okay? And I can save this out. I'll call it Fred, okay? And I can save that item out there. And that's been added in as being Fred in there. So the way that form's actually been built up is actually really straightforward. If I go into here. So the first thing I've got is if I have a look at that email validation, that was actually very straightforward to do. We've got this new add rules up here on the top right. We can go in there and we can basically got the thing to say whether or not it's an email address, and then we can actually just show a validation error, or we can actually go in there and display something being different red or a different color associated with that. And that's essentially how we did the date here as well. Add the rule. Is it in the future? And basically set to see that it's going to be the colour red for us to say that it's a bad. With regards to showing and hiding this not active section, basically I've created a section down here, given it a name, called it section. I've got this button up here, this radio button, checkbox button I should say, which is simple check. And all I've done is associated a rule on here. If I go into my manage rules, which I can say based on the value of what that value up here is as to whether or not I want to hide the control, which is down here on the right-hand side. Can you already see that? It's a little bit. 2 seconds. Okay. Should have loaded this up before I came in. Okay. Okay. So what I'm doing under here is simply doing the hide this control under there. Okay, based on that rule. Now, to get the map into that's fairly straightforward. Okay, it already understands what it is, so I can actually pull that particular field in there for me. Nice and easy. So we can show hide. Now, with regards to that state, that's actually pretty straightforward. Once again, that aligns to being a checkbox, a yes or no. So what I've done there is actually I've got 2 different sections under here, which basically has 2 different buttons. So I've got a picture button, which then basically does the same rule to say what happens if somebody clicks on that particular button. So if I do that, it's going to set the field's value, and I'm going to say that the alignment is set to evil, which is in there. What I then do on the section is I do a corresponding thing to say, based on what the alignment is, whether or not I actually hide that particular thing that's actually in there. Now this is actually quite a simple thing to do. Get the form going with no code. Showing and hiding is actually quite a common design pattern that you can do in the InfoPath forms as well. Nice and easy, very quick and simple to do. So let's go on and actually have a look at another form. Okay, so what I've got here is under TechEd tracks. So the idea being behind here is that now that I've actually got my speakers, Okay. What I want to be able to do is actually track what they're actually up to, who they're actually speaking, what they're doing. But I've also got this concept of actually having a radio button. Now, my graphics sucks, okay, I openly admit that. But just imagine that this actually does look like a tab. So what I can simply do is actually tab between these different areas, okay, to actually get this up and going. Now, there's a little bit of an interesting functionality that I've dropped into this as well. I don't want everyone to be able to see that internal tab and hence actually get to that information if I don't want them to see that. So what I've done under this particular one is that I've got this TechX permissions list, okay, which is sitting in here, and I've got my email alias sitting in there. What I can do is I can basically delete that item out of there, okay. If I go back to my TechEd tracks, add my item, the tab's now gone, okay. So what you can basically do here is that you can control the behaviour based on doing things. In this particular case, I'm actually based it on a value of an actual list and whether or not it's in there. I could have done other things like actually gone out and look at the permissions, etc., gone out to see what I'm actually authorised to do, or contacted something else. So this has all been done through what we call the data driving approach and the data connections that are actually in there. So just to prove that this does work, go back into permissions, add the item back in, go Wayne Win. I've got the caps lock, but that's cool. This should still hopefully work. Add the new item. Needed to be lowercase, that's cool. I can simply add a new item. Okay, go back into the tracks. Okay, and then I've got the tab back in. So let's have a look to see how that form's actually been wired up. So the way that I've done this is actually very straightforward. Essentially, what I've got is that I've got two different views of this particular form. So regard of view is basically being like a different page, okay, a different aspect of it. So the wire up is actually quite simple. For the track view, it's one form, or one view of it. For the internal, it's actually a different one. So what I'm basically doing is that when I click on this, which happens to be a picture button, if I go to my rules, home, manage rules, what I'm basically doing is I'm running this rule called switch view, and if I go into here, it's going to switch to the other view for me. Okay, nice and easy. The other thing that I do in there is that I will only want to show this form if my user permissions hasn't actually been set. So that's the first thing I need to do. So if my user permission hasn't been set to my username, I then want to hide this control so that you can't actually flick across. Now the way that we do this is I go into the data connections. Data connections, and I've got this new list, this new data connection in here called data permissions. Just to show you how you can add a new one in, I can go in there, I can receive data, go next, I can then go to a SharePoint list, point to that, pick the list I want to pull it out of, TK permissions, next. Now this is this is a bit of a change from 2007 to 2010. What I've got is the ability now to do an order by, okay, sort by which field I want to do and whether or not I want to do it ascending or descending. Okay, anybody come across this in 2007? Used to be a pain in the butt. Okay, so this is a big improvement to 210. Makes it nice and easy. So I can pull in my various fields that I want, change what I want to do, my sort order, okay, and set that up. So essentially what I've done, go back to my data connections, is on my TechEd permissions, I'm basically reading into that particular list, okay? And I'm getting back who I can give permissions to, okay? Go cancel out of that. What it will then do, as part of my form load, so go home, sorry, page, where's it gone? Form load, okay? What I then do is that I actually go out, I run the query, and I set the field's value of an internal field that I've actually got in there to make sure that I'm actually pulling back that value. So that's what I'm actually doing the wire up behind the scenes. Now another thing that I should have pointed out on the actual data connection that we've got in here is that if I do an add, just go back and do this again, receive data. Oops. Should have pointed this out, my apologies. Okay, next is we've got this option here. okay, which is to automatically receive the data when the form is actually opened. Now, the general recommendation against this is don't actually do this. Although we default it to yes, okay, try to not do it, okay, unless you actually need to. Basically, what you're going to do is that you're actually going to get a bit of a performance hit, okay, when it actually goes out and retrieves that data out, and you may not actually need that data at this particular time, okay. So the general guideline is turn this off unless you absolutely need to, okay. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward on that one. So simply just using a view, toggling between the two based on these simple rules that we've got in there, and then checking on the permissions against anything else that we actually need in there. Nice and easy. The next one to have a look at is this help desk request. Now this is a little bit more of an interesting form that we've got here. So just imagine this, the situation we've got is basically we want to set up a help desk system. What we want to be able to do is that we want to collect information from users about what the particular problem is. So what we'd expect them to do, instead of like them setting up and creating an email and kind of emailing everything to you, explaining it, you want to basically try and narrow it down to what is the actual information that you want. So what we could do under here is actually go, right, we've got a problem category. We can say it's, for example, creating content. We can then say, right, I want it around creating a new site or list. Okay, and then I can get those fields actually being displayed in here. If I go through and change this to a different area, it's like creating a new one. Well, that's pretty, bring it through. Quota, let's go into a different area. Okay, a little bug on my form there, but that's fine. Okay, I can actually change the fields that are actually sitting in there. Now, although I could actually go out there and actually develop this with an ASP.NET form, there'll actually be a lot of code and manipulation behind the scenes here to do this. Now, this is completely data-driven, okay? So what I can do under this, I can actually dynamically add in some additional information that I want to collect under here. So if you, basically, it's doing a bit of a wire-up using some additional lists behind the scenes here. So I've got this problem areas, and I've got a problem categories in here. So I'm just going to go in and add a new category. I'm going to call it TechEd. Oops, get rid of the caps lock. Go save. I then go into my problem areas. I'm going to add a new item. I'm going to go TechEd problem. Okay. And then under here I can actually say which fields I want to actually collect under here. So I can simply go that, date deleted, office product, and content owners, that will do, and assign it into my TechEd category down the end there. Click on save, go into my help desk requests, add a new item. Okay, TechEd's now in there. Oops, does help if I select it. TechEd problem. Okay, and the fields should have actually all appeared under there. Okay, so you can actually dynamically drive this. So you kind of think about this from a business situation where you can actually put this out into the users without actually having them to come back and understand InfoPath in order to actually drive this form up, okay, based on the information they want to collect out there. So the wire up on this is actually fairly straightforward to do. What we've basically done under this is, if I go into the form, what I've got is I've got a couple of things that we've got under here. I've got these different sections, okay, which basically relate down to the different areas that need to actually be displayed under there. Okay, under each one of these sections, I've got a rule. Just get rid of that, which basically says if got all occurrence of a value is equal to that particular field. So if we drive into here, what I'm basically doing is that I'm going out and getting some information back out based on what was actually the category and the problem area to get that particular row back, and then I'm reading into that list that I've got back there to check to see if any occurrence actually equals description. If it doesn't equal description, I'm then going to hide the control. So I can do that by simply reaching in there, getting that value from there, and then I've got different options which are sitting in there to say, right, I can then use all occurrence of a particular value that I've got there. Okay, very easy, very simple to do. Now the other cool thing too, which is another change from 2007 to 2010, was that if I created that rule, I'd have to actually go in and manually put that rule on everything. we've got these funky new little things over here, which enable us to now copy, okay, the rules. So I can create the rule once, so a bit of thinking had to go into how I was actually going to do this. I can then simply copy that particular rule, copy the rule, and then I can actually paste it onto another area and then just simply change, how I'm going to do the wire up on that. So it's trying to make it a little bit easier, save a bit of time on actually going through and actually, creating all of these. Now, the other thing that I'm doing too on this particular form is I'm actually doing a cascading drop down as well. So depending on the information that's selected under problem category, that will actually drop in and filter the information that's going to be doing under the problem area. Now, the way that we do that is actually, once again, very simple. So if we look at our, down into here, that should be under, that's fine. Now I come back. Okay. So what we've got is, I've got a couple of rules sitting under here, or a couple of actions that we're actually doing. The first one is that I'm going to set the field's value. I'm going to query using a data connection, and then I'm going to set the title to being now, just so I know what's actually in there. So if I have a closer look at that, I'm going out, I'm going to select the problem area that we've got sitting under there. Okay. I'm then going to set the internal value of that field, so I've got some information in there, and then that should actually filter down into querying using that particular area, so I can actually restrict what's actually in there. So it's a very common pattern that you can do there by putting a cascading drop down and filter onto your next list that you've actually got. So let's have a closer look. Okay, go problem area, insert field or function, problem area, and we can put a filter data onto that, okay, and filter it that way. Okay, cool. So that's actually quite easy and quite nice to do. Very quick, simple, easy to get it going, making it a very dynamic sheet that we've actually got sitting there. Now, the other thing that we've got on this particular form, if we go back to the user experience on this, I can actually get a different view of this. Okay, so what I've basically done here is that I've clicked on the edit. Now, this could actually happen as well as part of your form designs. So you want to have a different type of form design for when you're actually using, when somebody's filling it out, versus something that's actually going to be maintaining and editing it. Okay, so I can actually change the view that's actually associated with this. So basically what I've got here is some more important information, like the request ID, some status information around that, okay, and then the ability once again to do the show more, okay, so I can actually see some additional information that's actually sitting in there if I need to. Now the way to do that is actually pretty straightforward. If I go back to my form design of, just get rid of some of these, ticket, don't say, get rid of that one. I've actually got a different view of this. So I've got my edit form view. Okay, so that's sitting there waiting to go to be used. Now the cool thing we can do is that if I do a little bit of a tweak within SharePoint Designer, I can actually point the list to actually use this particular view as a part of the default ones that we've got in there. So the way that we do that is that we simply open up SharePoint Designer. We go in, have a look at our lists that we've got sitting in here. Lists and libraries. I've got my TechEd, where is it? My help desk, gone blind, help desk request sitting in here. Okay. Now I've got some content types sitting down the bottom here, so it accepts both the folder and the item content types, which is standard SharePoint type stuff. If I click in and look at my item, the important thing here is that it's actually saying what forms is it actually going to be using to actually display this information back for me. Okay, so it's going to use the edit InfoPath form, or it's going to use for the new form, it's going to use the new InfoPath form. So what I can do is I can simply go back, find my edit one, okay, jump in here, it's going to open it up eventually, okay, and there's my actual form sitting there that it's actually going to use. So once again, you've got to remember that SharePoint is actually using InfoPath natively behind the scenes. So what I can do under this is, if I have a look to see what my properties are of this, what I've got is, there's this attribute here called default view, And what I can simply do under that is actually set that to say what is going to be the default view that I want to use when I open this particular form. Okay? So if you kind of think about the possibilities behind this, okay, it basically becomes endless. Simply by just setting what this default view is going to be, I can actually go in and manipulate and show different aspects of the form based on what the user is actually doing there. Okay? Very, very easy to do. Okay? So that's how I basically get that different view on that. Otherwise, by default, it would actually use the same view. That is the default one. Now, the other thing that I've got on this particular form, I'll just get a little bit of information out. Go tech ed problem. Okay, let's see if I can find it. Okay, it's probably a little bit hard to see, but I've actually got a little bit of a mouse over there. It's got a little bit yellow in there. Okay. What I've done is that I've actually hidden a little picture button on there. Okay? The reason behind that is that I want to get in and have a look at a different view in here, which is my debug view of my form. So basically the idea or the concept behind this is that I may be developing my form up, but I'm trying to actually work out what's actually happening behind the scenes, okay, to see what I'm actually doing in here. So simply by doing a little hidden button on there, I can actually jump into debug view. I don't have to redeploy the form out, okay? It makes it a lot easier to actually see what's happening in here. So I can see what the actual information is actually on this particular form and where I've potentially gone wrong without actually having to go back and do stuff. Now the way that that's done, nice and easy. If I go into my InfoPath form, Tech Ed Help Desk, I'll just go back to my end user default. I've simply got, see if I can find it, there's my little button, control in there, okay, hidden under there. I've got a rule associated with that, manage my rules. Oops. Sorry. What is going? Okay, there's my rule, and all it's going to do is that it's going to switch to debug view. Okay, so basically what you can do, you can actually hide these on your forms if you want to, and it makes it a very easy way to actually switch between them to get out to do it. The other thing that you should do if you're going to do this is you should probably hide it from your views as well. So if I go back into my page design, if I look at my properties of my particular view, where's it gone? Okay, yeah. What I should do by default, this particular option is actually going to be set on. Okay, if I have that set on, when I go in and actually have a look at that item, it's actually going to have a little view thing on there. Okay, and I'll show you what that actually looks like. We'll just quickly click that on, go OK. I'll publish that back up, go back out. Help desk requests in the right place. Okay, was I in the right form? Okay, it should have actually displayed up in here. Basically what it should have done is up in here there'll be the opportunity in this particular area here to actually swap my views. So basically if you're going to do this, you want to remove it out of that so you don't actually get the opportunity to do that. Okay, so it's pretty funky, pretty neat. Okay, last few little tips around doing that. Right. Now, the other one that we can actually have a look at, what we can do is, we're going to have a look at tennis players. So what I've got is that I've got another form sitting here. Okay, go away, get rid of that. Okay, so let's go straight into preview, work offline. Okay, so, hang on, close that. Should be able to do it. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is the classic case where you've got like a tennis draw type example, okay? So what I've got is I've got a SharePoint list sitting out there, which has basically got all the information sitting out there, which is basically who's actually in, who my tennis players are, and that's sitting out in the SharePoint list. What I can then do is that I can then do the old cascading trick through, so I can say, right, who's going to be the winner of this particular match, and then that will filter down, okay, down into the different lists. On that one, there's nothing obviously in there because I haven't chosen the winner. So I can have a little bit of fun under here, get that going, okay, etc. And, and kind of play around with that and push that out if I wanted to. Now the way that that works is actually fairly straightforward, okay? So what I've got is I've basically got a repeating section in here. What this is doing is actually going out, grabbing the information from that list and actually showing the information in there. What I've then got is under each one of these is just a straight drop down. Now there's a little bit of a wire up under here with regards to the data connections that I've got on this. So if I go in here, have a look at the drop down list properties. If I have a look at my data source, I'm going out and reading the dentist players that are actually coming out of there. I'm looking at the entries that are actually coming out. So I've got my data fields, sorry, a little bit hard to see, which is pulling it out, that information out of that. Okay. And then I'm doing a filter data on that. So the filter data is basically where I'm saying, right, where the match ID actually equals 1. So I'm trying to get that first bit of information on that match, where that comes from. If I go back to my list, probably a little bit hard to see it together, but it's basically saying, where's my match ID? Okay? So that's how I'm doing this dynamic thing that I'm actually doing in there. So that basically, come out of that. Same thing on winner 2, okay? Do the same thing, but based on match ID 1. What I then do is that I do this, when I come to the drawer of this one, if I go in and change my properties on this, I do the same type of thing. I'm doing it on tennis players. I do my filter data. But this time, I'm doing where the ID is from the winner 1 or from the winner 2. So I'm actually narrowing it down as I go through. That's the way I can actually get my cascading data to actually come through into the different lists and drop-downs that I've actually got under there. Okay. And likewise under that one, winner 6, okay, and going through to being winner 7 at the very end, doing exactly the same thing under that. So I'm pulling that information through. Now the last thing that I do is I actually, if I'm running this form, I actually still want to be able to save that particular information, what the selections were there, back onto my SharePoint list. So what this enables me to do, if I go in here, go into my, should be a list in here, problem areas, ticket speakers, that's gone, damn, doesn't matter. Tennis picks, where's that? Sorry, it's up the top there. Sorry, thank you. Okay. Basically, if I go to add my document into here, okay, I bring up my form, just do some random stuff. Okay, pull that in. Okay. Now, what if I do a submit? What it's going to basically do, it's going to make it a bit easier to actually get there. It's actually going to just refresh the data under there. Okay, no, just didn't do it. Okay, it's basically using a promoted property back in to put this back out onto there. Okay, so do you understand what I mean by promoted property? Okay, the idea being here is that you've got a property within your form. Okay, if it matches the same as the column in your list, it will be promoted and demoted backwards and forwards between it. So automatically by having that same name, as soon as I submit the form, it's actually going to take that data out of my InfoPath form and promote it into the site, into the list for me. Okay, so I can use that if I need to. Okay, so that's pretty funky, pretty easy to do. Okay, nice and easy. And this was actually an example of using a forms library versus actually using a straight SharePoint list that we've got there. Okay. Right. Now one of the last ones I've got is I've got this, another list in here, go back in, and I've got, where's it gone? Ticket, okay, sorry, I'll bring up the form here. Okay. I'm just going to go straight into, okay. So what I've got here is I've got a very interesting scenario, okay. What I can do from my InfoPath forms is I can actually go in and use the REST service to actually go in there and pull and use functionality that's actually sitting in another location. So what I've got here is that I've actually got an Excel spreadsheet. So what I want to do is that I've got an Excel spreadsheet here, which basically does a simple very formula, okay, which gives me the net working days between two different dates. Okay, so very, very straightforward to do. If I put two different dates in here, like the 1st of the 3rd, 210, and the 3rd of the 1st, 210, okay, minus 41 days difference, business days between the two of them, okay? So there's some quite neat functionality and stuff you can actually do within Excel. So what I want to be able to do is, from my InfoPath form, I actually want to leverage that functionality, okay, as a potential option that you may want to do there. So in order to do that, what I needed to do, or what I can do, is actually take this Excel spreadsheet and push it up into my SharePoint site using Excel services. So that's actually very straightforward to do. So what that means is I've got my Excel spreadsheet, go into my site up here. If I go into my resources, I've got my same Excel spreadsheet, okay? It's sitting in there. I can actually now get to that Excel spreadsheet using the REST interface. So to do that, once again, this is straightforward. Okay, get rid of caps lock. Wayman, okay. Just come back a little bit. Okay. Okay. So the way that this works is I'm using REST to actually reach into that Excel spreadsheet that's actually sitting up on my server. Now to get this to actually get up and going in the first place, I first had to deploy my Excel spreadsheet up onto the SharePoint site. I then needed to enable the Excel service application, okay, to make sure that it was available. Okay, and then I can actually get into and reach into that particular Excel spreadsheet. Now, look at the format that we've actually got on the URL. There's actually a couple of key points around it. One of them is that we first point out where do we need to go to. Okay, so that becomes the URL of our particular SharePoint site. Then what we do is that we simply add in this VTI underscore VTI bin Excel REST ASPX, okay, into it. Okay, so that gets us into the REST interface. The next bit that we do is that we specify what's actually the name of our of our Excel spreadsheet. So mine happens to be under the resources list, and it's called Excel space, which is what the %20 is, Excel SX. And then I get into the format here, which is actually saying, give me back the model that's actually associated with it. So I'm essentially getting back an RSS feed directly back from this. Okay, so now I can actually reach in and do stuff in there. Now to make this a little bit more usable, what I've done under my Excel spreadsheet is that I've actually made these named fields. So if I go in and actually have a look at my data, sorry, where's it gone? Just make that a little bit bigger so I can actually see this. Formula, sorry, under my name manager, I've actually named those particular fields that are sitting in there. I've also getting back the result field as well. I've also, made that a name field as well. Now the reason behind that is that I want to be able to change those values, and then I want to get the result coming back from that. So the way that this works is if I go in to my Excel spreadsheet here, kind of cheat a little bit, I can bring back the range diff. Okay, so this should just bring me back the result which is actually sitting on the spreadsheet that's actually on the server. But if I then do some additional parameters under there, such as, it's a little bit hard to see and I do apologise for that. Okay, hang on, I'll just do that. Okay, that's actually running. Give that a few seconds. So what I've done is I've specified under here what my range is. I'm saying that I want to bring back an atom feed from it, so in different formats. So I can actually say whether or not it needs to be an HTML, or I can bring it back as a GIF. I can then say, right, I want to also add in as part of my query parameters what my range of my date 1 is, and then also what the range of my date 2 is. Okay, so that's actually passing the values into my Excel spreadsheet using REST. Okay, and the result I'm going to get back is this one sitting under here. That one's sitting under there, okay, from the results back. So what this means is that I can actually now consume this from my InfoPath form using this very simple format. And I can do this against any REST interface that I want to. So there is a few demos out there which actually go out And for example, you can type in an address, it'll go back and pull out from Bing Maps or Google Maps or whatever other type of map service that you want to use and actually display that map directly in your InfoPath form using exactly the same approach that we've got in here. Now, in order to do the wire up of this, it's actually fairly straightforward. If I go into my Excel REST, I've simply got a form in here. I calculate the working days and I display the results back in here. But the way that we do that is that we go in as part of our data connections. Okay, I've got this Excel REST service that's actually sitting in there. If I go to add a new one, this is one of the options that we had in here, which is this REST interface that's actually sitting on that. Okay. If I click through on next, I then need to specify in the URL that I've actually got sitting in there that I want to pull it back. Now, a little bit of a gotcha on this. What you should really do is the URL that you put in here is actually the thing that you actually want to pull back. Now, the reason behind that is that that data field that you want to pull back then becomes available as a form, a field, in the data or the schema that's coming back to you. Okay? So just to make that clear, if I go to here, what I should really be doing is passing in that, okay, make sure it's clear, as being the actual field. So I'm actually specifying in the range that I want to bring back. So that's going to make it available as a field that I can then manipulate and use as part of my form. If I go next, okay, it's going to go out, get the information for it. Okay, it needs to authenticate for some reason. Okay, and then it becomes available for me. Now, it's essentially what I've done under this Excel REST web service. Now, what I do when I go to do the calculate here is I simply go back, manage my rules. Okay, I've got this new action under here, which is the ability to change the REST URL. Okay, so this is a new thing that we've got under 2010. So what I want to be able to do there is actually change what's actually contained in my URL, so I can actually change the data that's being passed in and out of this particular thing. So have a look here. I've got the change REST URL. Have a look at the format of this particular thing. What I'm simply doing under there is using the concat function. Okay, using that existing URL that I had under there. Okay. And then I'm concatenating in the date range, which is the field that's coming off my form, and the other one that's coming off my form as well. So it's given me the opportunity here to actually manipulate and change and manage the URL that's actually being sent out to there. Okay. And I get the result back from that. Okay. So I then query. So I explicitly then run that Excel connection, bring that back into the form, and then I set the field's value coming back from that. So this is the reason why this is actually important, that under here, when we go to use, that we actually specify that in the first URL. Because if we drive down into it, sorry, go change the form that we've got under here, it'll be under content, row, and that's our field value sitting under there, which is what's actually going to come back as being part of that date range. Okay? If you don't do that, that's not going to appear in this particular field thing that's sitting in there. Okay, so what I should be able to do, try to connect. Okay, I should be able to put a couple of dates in there. Okay, and it should be able to go through, go yes, get rid of that. Okay, and there's my 3 days coming back out of that. Okay, very, very simple, very, very easy to do. Okay. So, I was actually worried about the amount of time this was going to take. It actually took a lot less. So, guess what? I'm giving you back 10 minutes. So basically what we've got here is I've got a summary of what we've actually gone through. Hopefully I've covered a lot of these. What you should really do, just to summarise, when you go to create your forms, really go through, create your fields first, your layouts, and do your rules second. It's a bit of a process that you actually go through. One thing I didn't point out is that you should actually name your fields. It kind of makes sense, but a lot of people don't actually do it. Try to use the most appropriate control, and also think about the way you can actually flick, between things. Like, for example, I had that checkbox, okay, using the image button to actually flick between the two of those. Use the right SharePoint form type, okay. The general guidance now is to try and use the SharePoint list more than the forms library one. Try and flatten a bit of the schema that you've actually got there. So that's actually looking at the amount of information that you've got actually sitting on that. If you can, store the data in multiple lists, okay, which you can do, which means you can actually pull the information back from different areas. You've got that funky new thing, which is using the REST connections, okay. Very, very easy to use. Think about the possibilities on that. It's actually quite cool. You can do it. Avoid trying to do an auto load of your data connections as well, okay. So try and manually, specify when you actually want to go out and get the data. Showed you a little bit around the tables and layouts. In fact, now that I've got a proper form up, let's just show you a little bit better. So if I go back into my into this one, I should be able to see under my page design, my page layout templates. In fact, it's not behaving. There should be some other layouts that are actually specified under there. Okay. Try and use themes and font styles, okay? Avoid the hard coding on that. And try and split your data into logical sections. Think about trying to hide them based on what the context and what people are actually doing on there. So you can actually hide and show them. Pretty straightforward and easy to do. You can also navigate to using that default view trick I showed you can do. So think about what you can actually do on that. And think about also putting that debug view into there as well. Quite a neat little way to actually go through and do it. Make it nice and easy. I've got my email address up there, so if you've got any questions around anything to do with InfoPath or anything around SharePoint 210 or 2007 or anything like that, don't hesitate to ping me an email. And that's basically it with 5 minutes to go. So time for questions. Yep. Yep. No. No. Okay, so the question is, on the first form that I just showed, I had the show hide, making it inactive or inactive, and things appear up and down. No, that's InfoPath doing that all for me. Okay, no code. Okay, all I was simply doing there was just setting the property of that particular section to say I'm going to hide that control based on the value of another field. Okay. Yes.
Again, in that first form, where you, no, like the second one, where you had the two tabs.
Yep.
The appearance of the second tab was based on whether a person was in a particular list.
Yes.
Could you have actually gone and queried that in the directory for that?
Absolutely. Okay, so the question is on the second one where I was showing and hiding the tab, okay, could I actually go off and query the Active Directory to say who's authorised to do that? Absolutely. Okay. I was just using the list as an example to, to kind of make it nice and easy to manipulate. But you can actually go off and do it against anything that you want to. Sorry. Oh,
Is there any difference in publishing code, form library code with code inside?
Okay. So the question there is, okay. So hopefully I get the question right. Okay. Under if you're using the form server side of things, okay, you've actually got two different options. You can actually make it up as a form, or you can actually publish it into the InfoPath. Now, and use the as a server-controlled form. Now, there is a difference between that. Okay, so basically, if you're doing that one, it's more if you're using if you're doing a .NET assembly associated with that. Okay, that's really the key difference because it does need to be managed in there. One thing that I should point out too, which is kind of associated to this, is if I go into, get rid of those, okay. If I go into my central admin, there's also been a bit of a change when it comes to the way that stuff is actually trusted within SharePoint, okay, particularly it's kind of relating to the InfoPath side, but from an Excel services point of view, what we've got is that by default now, all of the SharePoint sites are now actually trusted. Before you actually had to go through and explicitly add them in. Okay, so if we go into my service applications, manage service applications, come on. Go into Excel services, go into the manager of that. my trusted file locations, okay, I've now got this as actually being I've got this as being default, okay. This is a change from 2007. I'm actually in two minds about this, okay. Under 2007, it used to always catch you out because you actually had to go in and actually manually add this in to make it a trusted location. Now you've actually got everything by default, and you kind of think, well, since I've got REST, I can actually reach in there and grab any information out, okay. So it doesn't quite answer your question around that, but there is a difference between those forms, and it comes really down to being managed code. Okay, this gentleman first.
The cascading drop down. Is the data loaded? Is everything loaded?
Okay.
Or is it on demand?
Okay, so the question is around the cascading drop-down. Basically, you've got, and whether or not it's on demand or when you do it. It's up to you as to how you configure that. Okay, so you've got a couple of options. You can either, if based on what your data source is, you can either say as part of your actions, go get some more data and bring that down and then filter it. Or what you can potentially do is bring the data down and then do another filter based on that. The other thing you can also do, which I didn't show, is that you can actually filter, you can actually add like a where condition into your data connection as well by setting the fields on your query input fields. Okay. Okay, we'll take 3 more questions. Okay, that guy there.
Thank you, Wayne. I heard the example about the Excel services.
Mm-hmm.
Can the Excel services handle add-ins, as you normally have say, a useful analytical add-in in Excel? Can I, for example, add in the Reuters add-in to get a live data feed into Excel services?
Okay. So can you put an add-in into Excel services to do this? Now, the thing about Excel services, the way that works is that you can't actually have any code in that. You can only have user-defined functions, which have to be deployed in a different mechanism. So it's a limitation of Excel services. But conversely, if you want to use something like Reuters, if they've got a web service interface or something like that, or a REST interface, you could potentially use that to get that information back.
Right, but no regular
Okay, it's
C++ unmanaged
no.
add-in that you put in Excel?
No. Okay, the stuff that goes into Excel services can only be vanilla Excel services, no VBA, stuff like that.
Okay, not even a VBA macro?
No, you have to turn it into a user-defined function.
It's what like if you had a document library with some content types associated with it.
Yep.
You're loading your documents in and you're choosing your metadata with the content type.
Yep.
Can you use InfoPath to customize that part of the form as well?
Okay, so the question is if you've got different content types associated with your document or your forms library, can you customize that? You should be able to. Okay, I haven't tried that, but you should be able to. Okay, because once again, the way to think about your content types is really just saying which fields are associated, which site columns are actually associated on there, so you should be able to get to that information. Okay, could be worth a try. I might hack it tonight. Okay, there you go. So document inspectors, you can do it. Come on up. Okay, one last question. No last questions? Enjoy the rest of TechEd. Thanks for coming.